So I'm making this video because there is a trend that I've noticed discussing things with atheists, and that is the tendency to conflate the idea of falsifiability and testability of a claim with whether or not that claim can be true.
Oh, gosh, sorry. I just... The guy, he's so... Well, anyway, let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers. BionicDance here. Today we're talking, thanks to one of my loyal Patreon patrons, which you all should be, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, about what I see as an offshoot of the burden of proof argument and who has it. Falsifiability. In layman's terms, the basic idea is that if you can't potentially disprove a claim, if you can't run an experiment to test it, then there is no reason to treat it as valid, as more than just imagination or wishful thinking. Dude Boy here is claiming that just because something can't be tested, can't be falsified, that doesn't mean it's not so. But if the question is of existence, falsifiability is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, how could you have ever encountered such a thing?
And the problem with this is there are a number of things, a very large number of things, that are not falsifiable but are very obviously true.
When somebody says that something is obviously true, I kind of want to smack them upside the head. There have been a lot of things throughout human history that have seemed obvious, far beyond any shadow of a doubt. Flat earthers, anyone? But that later turned out to be a steaming pile of horseshit. It's when something seems obvious that we should be most on your guard, most willing to be skeptical of your own perceptions and reasoning.
For example, one example is that reality is real. This is not a falsifiable claim. You could not prove that reality is not an illusion.
Well, I could ask, what is reality? Which seems like a dippy, new age, sound of one hand clapping question that probably requires candles and meditation to even think of it. But it's actually rather valid. Before we even try to falsify a claim, we have to first define our terms. Are we looking for a physical reality? Are we looking for a spiritual reality? Are we checking to see whether our universe is false, like we're living in a simulation? What is reality? The reality we're looking for, the reality we're investigating.
It's not testable in any possible way, because in order to perform a test, in order to falsify that claim, reality has to be real.
Sounds to me like reality is its own evidence and conclusion.
And, I mean, another one would be, for example, I just imagined a picture of an emerald. I mean, there is literally no way to prove that that didn't actually happen. At all. But it did, and it's true.
Okay, see, while falsifiable does seem to have the word false in it, it's not about disproving something. It's about having the potential to show that something isn't so. In the last few years, I've been in countless MRI machines and hooked up to an EEG, and my brain activity has been quite thoroughly measured. If we don't eventually find the means to turn the chugging of our head meats into decodable information, I'll be shocked. With that in mind, does the potential to read thoughts exist? Could we have known what he was thinking? Possibly. His claim to have thought about jewelry had falsifiability, even if in that specific instance we weren't doing it.
And as it is with things of the spirit, just sort of inherently they are not falsifiable, but that has absolutely no bearing on whether or not those things are true.
As with the question about the nature of reality, what are things of the spirit? I've read enough fantasy novels in my time. This one is particularly bad, and seen enough horror movies that, yeah, I get the basic concept, sure. But can anybody answer that question without the reply boiling down to just one word? Magic. Things of the spirit. If they can't be falsified, can't be investigated, where did anybody hear about them in the first place? Can a reply be given that doesn't amount to things of the spirit being made up?
If I was to say, for example, what's it called? In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Well, this is an inherently unfalsifiable claim because our abilities of testing anything can only go so far back as the creation has existed.
If nobody can check what happened that far back, then where did the idea that a god did it come from? Theists can't see it. Atheists can't see it, but for some reason that means that the claim a beardy cloud man got out his Lego set and built it all should be treated as anything more than a fairy tale. But okay, if we can't falsify it, then let's look at how likely it is to be true. So far, with everything that can be falsified and which has been investigated, God did it has turned out to be the wrong answer 100% of the time, and anything asserted without evidence can be discarded in the same way. Even if we concede that God's existence is possible, the likelihood is so infinitesimal that believing such a creature exists is quite thoroughly chowder-headed.
You can't test anything outside of the creation because you're in it and you're part of it. So, we can't look any further back than the physical things around us can allow us to.
Why? If we're being told to accept that a God exists, even though we can't investigate it, why should we accept that we can't look outside creation someday, some way? How do we even know that there is an outside to look out of? This whole argument is predicated on accepting the limits of someone else's legend when there are so many other legends out there, and those who don't start with legends, and whose answers come from what they can find, not what they believe.
But that doesn't necessarily mean, just because the claim is unfalsifiable, that it's not actually a true claim. This is why anything that has to do with God requires faith, because the very nature of spiritual reality is that things cannot be falsified.
There's a reason I'm an apistivist, someone who does not use faith as a method of reaching conclusions, because the answer, if it can even be called one, has less substance than your breath on a cold winter's day. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to quote from my favorite book. So the answer, if it's anywhere, ought to be here. He waved at a pile of religious books. Only it's not. Bits and pieces that grok true, but never a pattern. Or if there is a pattern, every time, without fail, they ask you to take the hard part on faith. Faith! What a dirty Anglo-Saxon monosyllable. Jill, how does it happen that you didn't mention that one when you were teaching me the words that mustn't be used in polite company? More than anything else, that book solidified my atheism. It's an insightful commentary on human existence and human thought. If you haven't read it, you're not doing yourself any favors.
To give you another example of a thing that is unfalsifiable and yet is true, I have a subjective experience of being an individual separate person. Now, I cannot prove that to you. I mean, for all you know, I'm nothing but a figment of your imagination and a hallucination, and there's absolutely nothing that could be done to prove that that's actually true. It is, though.
Says you.
So how would you expect me to prove that to you? I can tell you that, but if you don't want to believe it, that doesn't mean anything.
What I want is immaterial. What can be shown, that's what matters. I can assess probability, but if you're giving me nothing to go on but your word, can you really blame me for going, nah? Experience tells me that your existence is highly probable to the point where it would be chowder-headed to bet against that particular horse. But the existence of a god, on the other hand, is on the exact opposite end of the probability spectrum. And like I said, I'm an apistivist. I'm not going to go ahead on faith.
Falsifiability is not a trait of every true claim.
If something isn't falsifiable, there is no way to know whether it's true or not. But so far, every claim which can be shown to be true has been a falsifiable one. I'd like to know how anything can be identified as a true claim if it cannot be falsified. He never showed us how that can be. His entire argument seems to boil down to little more than the kicking and screaming of someone who doesn't want to admit that their position is untenable. In fact, his examples were all based in thought, imagination, subjective perspective, beliefs. I wonder how he'd react to an unfalsifiable claim that he didn't already agree with, someone else's imaginary sky spirit. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think. Dewey, what the hell are you doing? Get out of the way!
Sandra, this isn't right. There has to be a better way to make money than taking these assassination contracts.
Like what? What do you have in mind?
Well, have you ever considered Patreon?
Patreon? Where people donate money for those videos I'm in? Do you really think that'll pay the bills, Dewey?
Well, if people want to prevent a few international incidents, I'm sure they'll be willing to contribute. After all, what's $1 or $2 per video to forestall the occasional war, right?
Well, I suppose I could give it a try. You'd better be right about this.
Come on, Sandra, let's go home. Sandra!
What? He was right there. I'll start that Patreon thing tomorrow. Promise. Hey, this is a nice computer you got over here. Be a shame you didn't subscribe to BionicDance. I'd hate for something bad to happen to it.